Welcome to Learn English Through History. I am so glad you are here with me today. Before we begin, let us take a moment together. Sit back, relax your shoulders. Take a slow, deep breath in, hold it for a second, and now breathe out, gently. Good. Let your body feel comfortable. Let your mind feel quiet. You are in the right place. There is no rush. We are going to learn English together, slowly and calmly, through a true story from history. Today's story is about a man who changed the world, not with weapons, not with money or power. He changed it with something much simpler. Courage, quiet courage. Picture a small boy in a classroom in India. The year is around 1876. The room is warm. Children sit on the floor. A teacher stands at the front. He asks the children to write a word. It is a spelling test. The boy writes carefully. He is slow. He is nervous. His hand shakes a little. Then something happens. A British inspector visits the classroom. The inspector watches the children. He wants to see if they are smart. The teacher looks at the boy. The teacher quietly signals to him. He wants the boy to look at another child's answer. He wants the boy to cheat. To cheat means to copy someone else's work and pretend it is yours. But the boy does not look. He does not copy. He gets the word wrong. The teacher is angry later. The other children laugh. They think the boy is stupid. But the boy is not stupid. He simply believes that cheating is wrong. Even at this young age, he already feels something powerful inside him. A sense of what is right and what is wrong. This boy is shy. He is afraid of the dark. He runs home from school every day because he is scared other children will talk to him. He does not have many friends. He is thin and small. His ears are large. When he speaks, his voice is soft. Nobody in that classroom, not the teacher, not the inspector, not the laughing children, nobody thinks this boy will do anything important. They are all wrong. This boy will one day lead 300 million people. He will stand against the largest empire the world has ever seen. He will go to prison again and again. He will be beaten. He will nearly die from hunger. On purpose, many times. Kings and presidents will ask for his advice. His ideas will travel across oceans and inspire people on every continent for generations after his death. His name is Mohandas Gandhi. The world will come to know him as Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma is a title. It means great soul. But he was not born great. He became great. And that is what makes his story worth telling. He was born on October 2nd, 1869, in a small coastal town called Porbandar. It sits on the western edge of India, facing the Arabian Sea. The houses there were made of white stone. The streets were narrow. The air smelled of salt and dust. His family was not poor, but they were not rich either. His father, Karamchand Gandhi, worked as a Diwan. A Diwan is like a chief minister of a small local state. It was an important position. His father was a practical man, respected in the community. He solved problems between people. He did not have much formal education, but he understood people well. Gandhi's mother was named Putlabai. She was a deeply religious woman. She prayed every day. She often fasted. To fast means to choose not to eat for a period of time, usually for spiritual or religious reasons. She fasted regularly and never complained. Gentle, yes, but strong in her beliefs. If she made a promise, she kept it, always. Young Mohandas watched his mother closely. He saw how she lived with discipline. He saw how she treated everyone with kindness, even people who were unkind to her. He noticed her quiet strength. Much later in life, when Gandhi would fast for weeks to protest injustice, people wondered where he found such willpower. The answer was simple. He learned it from his mother, in that small white house in Porbandar, watching her pray in the morning light. He was a shy boy. That is important to remember. He was not loud. He was not confident. He did not raise his hand in class. When the school bell rang, he did not stay to talk with other children. He picked up his books and walked home alone. The other boys played together in the dusty yard. They laughed and ran and called each other's names. But young Mohandas stood at the edge, watching. He wanted to join them. Something held him back. Not fear of danger, fear of being noticed. He was afraid of the dark too. At night, he imagined thieves hiding in the shadows. He imagined ghosts behind every door. His heart beat fast when the oil lamp went out. A servant named Ramba noticed this. She told him something simple. Repeat the name of God, it will protect you. He tried it. And slowly, night by night, the fear grew smaller. He never forgot Ramba's advice. That small lesson stayed with him for the rest of his life. At school, he was an ordinary student. Not the best, not the worst. He sat quietly and did his work. His handwriting was not very good. He struggled with multiplication tables. One day, a British inspector visited his school and gave the students a spelling test. The teacher secretly signaled Mohandas to copy the correct answer from the boy sitting next to him. Mohandas refused. He could not do it. Even as a child, something inside him resisted dishonesty. Why pretend to know something you do not know? He came home from school each afternoon and sat near his mother. He listened to her stories from the old Hindu texts, stories about truth, about patience, about people who suffered but never gave up their principles. A principle is a strong belief that guides how you behave. His mother's principles were clear. Tell the truth. Keep your promises. Do not harm others. One story affected him deeply. It was the story of a king named Harishchandra, who lost everything because he refused to tell a lie. He lost his kingdom. He lost his family. He suffered terribly, but he never lied. Young Mohandas watched a play about this king, and tears rolled down his face. He thought, why can I not be like Harishchandra? Why can I not live for truth, no matter what it costs? That question planted itself inside him like a seed. He did not know it yet. He could not see it yet, but that seed would grow, slowly, through years of confusion and failure and loneliness. And one day, it would change everything. Around this time, something else happened. Something that would shape his life in ways he never expected. His family arranged his marriage. He was 13 years old. His bride, Kasturbai, was also 13. This was not unusual in India at that time. Child marriage was a common tradition. To arrange means to plan and organize something. His family arranged the wedding, and the two children had no say in the matter. He later wrote about his wedding with a mix of embarrassment and honesty. He admitted he was excited about the new clothes. He was excited about the sweets and the music, but he also admitted he did not truly understand what marriage meant. He was a boy, she was a girl, and suddenly they were husband and wife. Their early years together were difficult in small, private ways. He was jealous. He was possessive. Possessive means wanting to control someone because you feel they belong to you. He did not want Kasturbai to go out without his permission. He tried to control where she went and who she spoke to. She resisted. She was strong-willed. She did not simply obey. They argued. They struggled. It is strange to think about. The man who would one day teach the whole world about peace and respect could not, as a teenager, treat his own wife with fairness. But that is the truth. And Gandhi himself never hid from it. Years later, he wrote about those early mistakes openly. During this same period, his father fell seriously ill. Mohandas spent many evenings sitting beside his father's bed, rubbing his legs, bringing him water. He took this duty seriously. He wanted to be a good son. But one night, while his father was very sick, Mohandas left the room. He went to be with Kasturbai. And that night, his father died. Mohandas was not there. This moment haunted him for the rest of his life. To haunt means something stays in your mind and causes you pain, again and again. He felt deep guilt. He believed he had chosen his own desires over his duty to his dying father. He never forgave himself for it. That guilt stayed with him like a shadow, and it shaped the way he thought about discipline and sacrifice for decades to come. After his father's death, the family's income dropped. They were not poor, but life became harder. Mohandas was not a strong student. His grades were average. He was still shy, still unsure of himself. He did not stand out in any obvious way. No teacher looked at him and saw a future leader. No friend expected great things. He was ordinary. But his family had a plan. An old friend of his father suggested something bold. Send the boy to England. Let him study law in London. A law degree from England would bring respect. It would bring opportunity. It would help the family. Mohandas felt a spark of excitement. England. London. The idea seemed enormous, almost impossible. He had never left his small part of India. He barely spoke English well, but something inside him wanted to go. Something wanted to see what lay beyond the world he knew. His mother was not sure. She worried about her son going so far away, across the ocean, to a land full of strangers. She had heard stories. People in England ate meat. They drank alcohol. They lived by different rules. She made Mohandas take a vow before she would agree. A vow is a very serious promise. He promised her 3 things. He would not eat meat, he would not drink alcohol, he would not touch another woman. He held his hand over a sacred text and gave his word. In 1888, at the age of 18, Mohandas Gandhi boarded a ship and sailed for England. The journey took several weeks. He stood on the deck and watched the coast of India grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. Everything familiar was behind him. Everything ahead was unknown. When he arrived in London, the city overwhelmed him. The streets were wide and gray. The buildings were tall and dark with soot. People walked fast. They spoke fast. The weather was cold and damp, nothing like the warm sun of Porbandar. He did not know how to dress properly for the climate. He did not know the customs. He did not know how to make conversation at dinner. He felt completely alone, not the loneliness of a shy boy at the edge of a schoolyard. This was deeper. Back home, even as a quiet child, he had family around him. He had familiar streets, familiar food, familiar sounds. Here, everything was foreign. Foreign means strange and unfamiliar, from a different country. London was foreign to him in every possible way. Finding food was one of his first struggles. He had promised his mother he would not eat meat. But in London in the late 1880s, almost every meal contained meat. Restaurants served beef and mutton and pork. His landlady cooked meat dishes. He did not know where to find a meal he could eat without breaking his vow. He wandered the streets, hungry and lost. He survived on bread and porridge for days. He grew thin, he grew tired, but he did not break his promise. Then one afternoon, walking down a side street he had never noticed before, he found a small vegetarian restaurant. He stepped inside. The smell of cooked vegetables and warm bread filled the room. He sat down and ate a full meal for the first time in weeks. That small restaurant changed something inside him. Not just because of the food. On a shelf near the door, he noticed a thin book about vegetarianism. He picked it up and read it that same evening. The book argued that choosing not to eat meat was not weakness. It was a choice made with thought and care, a kind of quiet strength. He had kept his promise to his mother out of love. Now he began to see it differently. This was not just obedience, it was a principle. He started to understand that small personal choices could carry real power. He joined a vegetarian society in London. This mattered, and not because of the food. For the first time in this enormous, cold city, he found people who wanted to talk to him. They were kind. They were curious. They did not laugh at his accent or his quiet manner. They listened. Slowly, very slowly, he began to speak up at meetings. His voice still shook sometimes. His hands still trembled when he stood before a group. But he practiced. He forced himself to say a few words, then a few more. Each time, it got a little easier. Not easy, just a little easier. He also threw himself into his studies. The law books were thick and dense. Dense means packed tightly with information, difficult to get through. He read for hours each day, underlining passages, copying definitions into notebooks. The English legal system was complicated, built on centuries of tradition and precedent, but he was patient. He had always been patient. He tried other things too. He took lessons in French. He tried learning to dance, the waltz, the foxtrot, the kinds of dances that young English gentlemen were expected to know. He was terrible at it. He stepped on his partner's feet. He lost the rhythm. Eventually, he gave up dancing altogether. But the attempt tells us something. He was trying to belong. He was reaching out, even when it felt awkward and embarrassing. London did not turn him into a confident man. Not yet. When he finished his law degree and was called to the bar, that means he was officially allowed to work as a lawyer, he was still the same quiet, nervous person underneath. He had learned the law. He had learned to wear a suit and tie properly. He had learned to eat with a knife and fork in the English style. But inside, the shy boy from Porbandar was still there, watching, unsure. He sailed back to India in 1891. He was 21 years old. He carried a law degree and a new wool suit and not much else. His mother had died while he was away. No one had told him in time. He came home to a house that felt emptier than the one he had left. Now he had to build a career. He had to stand up in courtrooms and argue cases in front of judges. For someone who could barely speak at a vegetarian meeting without trembling, this was a terrifying thought. And it went badly. His first real case in court was a disaster. He stood up to cross-examine a witness. Cross-examine means to ask questions to test whether someone is telling the truth. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His mind went blank. The courtroom was silent. Everyone stared at him. He sat back down, humiliated. He could not do it. He could not speak in court. The career he had spent 3 years in London preparing for seemed impossible now. He failed in that courtroom. He sat down and felt the shame burn through him. But we are moving too fast. Let us go back to the very beginning. Because this story does not start in a courtroom. It starts in a small town by the sea. Porbandar sits on the western coast of India, facing the Arabian Sea. In the 1860s, it was a quiet place. White stone buildings lined the narrow streets. Fishermen dragged their boats onto the sand each morning. The air smelled of salt and dried spices. Not a big city, not powerful or famous, simply a small coastal town where families lived the way their grandparents had lived before them. Mohandas was born here on October 2, 1869. His family's house was old, built from pale stone, with thick walls that kept the rooms cool in summer. It had small windows and a courtyard in the center. Several generations lived under that same roof. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all sharing meals, sharing space, sharing noise. His father, Karamchand Gandhi, was the Diwan of Porbandar. A Diwan is like a chief minister, the person who helps a local ruler manage the town's affairs. It was an important position. People came to the house to ask his father for help with disputes, with taxes, with problems between neighbors. His father was practical, serious, and respected. He had little formal education, but he understood people. He knew how to listen to both sides of an argument and find a solution that felt fair. Young Mohandas watched this. He sat quietly in corners, while visitors spoke with his father. He saw how his father handled angry people without raising his voice. He saw patience used as a tool. He probably did not understand it then. Children rarely do. But it settled into him like water soaking into dry earth. His mother, Putlibai, shaped him in a different way. She was deeply religious. She prayed every day, sometimes for hours. She visited the temple so regularly that it felt like part of breathing, and she fasted often. Fasting means choosing not to eat for a period of time, usually for spiritual reasons. Putlibai would make difficult vows. She once promised not to eat until the sun appeared during the rainy season. Day after day, the clouds stayed thick and gray. Her children would run outside, scan the sky, and rush back in. No sun yet, mother. She waited. She did not break her promise. This was not performance. She was not trying to impress anyone. She simply believed that a promise was a promise, even when it caused pain, even when it seemed unreasonable. Mohandas never forgot this. His mother's quiet, stubborn faith in keeping her word planted something deep inside him. The household was vegetarian, strictly so. They ate no meat, no fish, no eggs. This was normal for their community, a Vaishnavite Hindu family. Food was prepared carefully, with prayer. Meals were simple: rice, lentils, flatbread, vegetables cooked with cumin and turmeric. The kitchen smelled warm and familiar every evening. Mohandas was not a remarkable child. He was small, with big ears and dark, watchful eyes. Not the best student in school. Not the fastest runner. He did not lead games or shout orders at other boys. He was, by his own later description, an ordinary boy, perhaps even less than ordinary, shy, afraid of the dark, afraid of thieves, afraid of snakes and ghosts, and things that probably were not there. He ran home from school each day as soon as the bell rang. Not because he loved home so much, because he did not want to talk to the other boys. Conversation frightened him almost as much as the dark did. What if they laughed at him? What if he said something foolish? It was easier to just run. Then something happened when Mohandas was 13 years old, something that would shape the rest of his life in ways no one could have predicted. He got married. Yes, 13 years old. A boy who was still afraid of ghosts was now a husband. His bride was a girl named Kasturba. She was also 13. In their community, in that time, this was not unusual. Child marriage was a common tradition. Families arranged marriages early, sometimes when the children were still babies. The wedding date was chosen by the parents, not by the boy or the girl. They had no say. Let me explain the word arranged. An arranged marriage is a marriage planned by the families, not by the couple themselves. The parents decide who their child will marry. In many parts of 19th century India, this was simply how things were done. The wedding was a grand event. Mohandas later remembered the bright colors, the music, the procession through the streets. He remembered the new clothes he wore, and the sweet food on silver plates. He remembered feeling excited. He was 13. He did not fully understand what marriage meant. To him, it felt like a festival, a celebration with gifts and attention and sweets. But he also remembered something else. He remembered feeling nervous. He had to sit beside this girl he barely knew, Kasturba. She had sharp, dark eyes. She was not shy like him. She was strong-willed, stubborn even. When Mohandas tried to tell her what to do, as young husbands in that culture often did, she simply refused. This surprised him. He expected obedience. He had watched his mother obey his father in many things, but Kasturba was different. If she wanted to go out, she went out. If Mohandas told her she could not visit a temple without his permission, she looked at him calmly and went anyway. He became jealous, possessive. These are strong words, but Gandhi himself used them later when he wrote about this period. Possessive means wanting to control someone, treating them almost like something you own. He admitted that he tried to control Kasturba. He wanted to know where she went. He wanted her to ask before she left the house. She did not cooperate. This tension between them lasted for years. Two teenagers, bound together by tradition, trying to figure out what it meant to share a life. Neither of them had chosen this. Neither of them was ready. And while Mohandas struggled with his young marriage, he also struggled with another question, a question about food. One of his school friends, a boy named Sheikh Mahatma, was strong and tall, bold. He was everything Mohandas was not, and Sheikh Mahatma ate meat. He told Mohandas that meat was the secret. The British are powerful because they eat meat, he said. If Indians ate meat, we would be strong too. We could push the British out. This idea burrowed into Mohandas like a worm into soft wood. He was small. He was weak. He was afraid of so many things. Maybe meat really was the answer. So one day, in secret, Mohandas ate meat for the first time. He went to a hidden spot near a river with Sheikh Mahtab. They cooked goat meat over a small fire. Mohandas chewed it slowly. The taste was tough, strange. His stomach turned. That night, he felt as though a live goat was kicking inside him. He could not sleep, but he tried again. And again. For about a year he ate meat in secret, maybe a dozen times. Each time the guilt was enormous. He was lying to his mother. He was breaking a promise that mattered to her more than almost anything. And in the end, he stopped. Not because the meat tasted bad, because the lying felt worse. He made a private vow. No more meat, no more deception. He did not know it yet, but this small decision, choosing truth over strength, would become the foundation of everything he built later. Then, when Mohandas was 16, his father Karamchand fell seriously ill. The old man had been unwell for a long time, but now he was fading. Mohandas sat by his bed many evenings, rubbing his father's legs, bringing him water. He loved his father deeply, even though they rarely spoke about feelings. That was not their way. One night, Mohandas was sitting with his father. It was late. His uncle came and offered to take over. Mohandas hesitated. He was tired, and part of him wanted to go to Kasturba, so he left his father's room and went to his wife. A few hours later, a servant knocked on the door. His father was dead. Mohandas was not there. He had left his dying father's side to be with his wife. This moment haunted him for the rest of his life. He called it a shame that he could never wash away. He wrote about it decades later, and even then, the pain was raw on the page. He was 16 years old, married, and now without a father. The family needed a plan. Mohandas was not the best student, but he was curious and determined. An old family friend, a Brahmin named Mavji Dev, came to the house with advice. He looked at Mohandas and said something unexpected. Send him to England. Let him study law. 3 years in London, and he will come back a barrister. He can follow his father's path. Maybe even become a Diwan himself. Derry, England. The word hung in the air like smoke. London was impossibly far from Porbandar, across oceans, across worlds. Mohandas felt a jolt of excitement and terror at the same time. His mother, Putlibai, was afraid. England was a foreign land full of foreign customs. She worried her son would eat meat, drink alcohol, lose his way. Mohandas begged her. He got down on his knees. Finally she agreed, but only after he made a solemn vow. He stood before a Jain monk, a holy man his mother trusted deeply, and there, with his hand raised, Mohandas made 3 promises. He would not touch meat. He would not drink wine. He would not look at women who were not his wife. His mother listened. She nodded. She let him go. Getting to England was not simple. His caste leaders heard about his plan and called a meeting. They told him that crossing the ocean was against their rules. No one from their community had ever gone to England. They said he would be an outcast, someone rejected by the group. An outcast is a person the community refuses to accept. If he left, they would treat him as if he did not exist. Mohandas listened. He was afraid, but he went anyway. He was 18 years old when the ship pulled away from the port of Bombay. He stood on the deck and watched India shrink behind him. The sea was enormous. The sky felt too wide. He did not speak to anyone for days. He did not know how to use the silverware at dinner. He did not understand the conversations happening around him in fast, clipped English. He felt invisible. Now pause here with me for a moment. Take a slow breath in, and let it go. Because here is where the story turns again. Mohandas spent 3 years in London. He studied law. He read thick books in cold rooms. He learned to dress in English suits and tie a necktie. He even took dancing lessons and tried to learn the violin, though he was not very good at either. He was trying, in his quiet way, to fit in, to belong. But belonging did not come easily. He was vegetarian in a city that loved roast beef. He was shy in a culture that rewarded confidence. He walked the grey streets of London alone most evenings, missing home, missing Kasturba, missing the warm air of Gujarat. And yet something important was happening inside him. He joined the London Vegetarian Society, a group of people who chose not to eat meat. For the first time, he stood up in meetings and spoke to strangers. His voice shook. His words were few, but he spoke. He also discovered new books, books about religion, about philosophy, about how people should treat each other. He read the Bhagavad Gita for the first time in English, and it moved him in ways he did not expect. He read the Bible and was struck by the Sermon on the Mount. He was beginning to see that truth and nonviolence were not just Indian ideas, they belonged to the whole world. He passed his exams. He became a barrister, a type of lawyer who can argue cases in court. He packed his English suits into a trunk, boarded a ship, and sailed home to India. He was 21 years old. But India did not welcome him the way he hoped. He tried to start a law practice in Bombay. It did not go well. In his very first case, he stood up in court to question a witness, and no words came out. His mind went blank. His hands trembled. He sat back down, embarrassed, and another lawyer had to finish for him. He moved back to Rajkot and tried smaller cases there. He earned a little money, but he was not happy. He felt stuck. He felt small. A trained lawyer with a London education, and yet he could not find his place. Then a letter arrived. A business firm in South Africa needed a lawyer who spoke Gujarati and understood Indian culture. The job was simple: help with a legal dispute between 2 merchants. It would last about a year. The pay was modest. South Africa was far away. Mohandas said yes, not because the job excited him, but because staying felt worse. He arrived in the port city of Durban in 1893. He was 23. South Africa was a British colony then, and the rules there were harsh, especially for people with dark skin. Indians were called coolies, a word meant to insult. They were not allowed in certain hotels. They could not walk on certain sidewalks. Mohandas noticed all of this, but at first, he said nothing. He was there for work, not for politics. Then came the train. About a week after arriving, he boarded a train from Durban to Pretoria. He had a first-class ticket. He had paid for that seat. He had every right to be there, but a railway official walked up and told him to move to the third-class car. Mohandas refused. He had a valid ticket, so they threw him off the train. At Pietermaritzburg station, in the cold of a South African winter night, He sat alone on that dark platform. He did not sleep. He thought about what had just happened. He thought about every insult, every sidewalk he could not walk on, every door closed in his face, and something changed inside him that night. He did not yet know the word for it. But years later, the world would. Now, this story covers only the early years of Gandhi's life, his childhood shyness, his struggles in London, and his first taste of injustice in South Africa. History is complex, and scholars continue to study and debate many parts of his legacy. We share this story to help you practice English and to explore the past together. If this story helped you learn something new, in English and in life, hit subscribe to Learn English Through History, where every week we turn the world's most incredible true stories into your next English lesson.